Professor Joe Siracusa joins me. He's a professor of political history and diplomacy at Curtin University. He joins me from Perth in Australia. Professor, good to see you. Good to have you here with us on TRT World. Now, since October 7, we have seen many statements coming from the United States, from Israel, and most of them basically indicate that, according to Washington, there are groups backing Hamas in Iran, in Syria, in Iraq. And in the wake of October 7, the U.S. has sent more than 900 troops to the region. The U.S. has sent Stryker carriers, two Stryker carriers, I believe, up until now. But the latest airstrike that took place in Syria, according to the Defense Secretary, is not related to what's happening between Hamas and Israel. Does that statement sound reasonable to you?
Good morning. No, actually, this statement is not true. It does greatly relate to what's going on in Gaza between the Israeli Defense Force and the people from Gaza. So, you know, the statement isn't true. But I'm going to tell you the worst kept secret in Washington. America is at war with Iran. And they are at war with Iran through the proxy war between Israel and Gaza right now. And those two aircraft carrier groups could take on any country. They have powerful punch. They got outreach. They have atomic weapons and all the rest of it. The one thing Iran doesn't want to fool around with is American air power, because the American way of war is quite awesome when it comes to the air power. So they don't want to fool around with that. But look, the Secretary of Defense, who's the chief military officer in the president's cabinet, and he doesn't need orders, by the way. He doesn't have to call the White House at 3 o'clock in the morning. They have orders, and they took out munitions and ammunition dumps in Syria, which had Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard on the premises. So they have actually spilled Iranian blood. So it's up to the Iranian, you know, and it's in response to these attacks on American troops who are on Iran and Syrian soil. Now you may say, what are they doing in Iraq and on Syrian soil? That's a really good question. You know, these wars are over for a long time, particularly the American presence in Iraq and the American position in Syria. I'm not quite sure what they're doing there. But look, it's quite clear that Israel can count on the United States Armed Forces to do whatever it has to do to back them up. And I have to tell you that in my many years of tracking wars and writing about the most important wars in the 20th and 21st century, this one, Jaffer, is becoming incomprehensible. I mean, the Israeli policy of scorched earth just doesn't make any sense anymore.
Professor, correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of U.S. foreign policy, a lot of it has to do with the domestic issues of the country. Elections are just around the corner in the U.S. Next year, we'll see another presidential elections in the country. And whether or not the U.S. engages in the Middle East militarily will depend upon what's the public opinion. What's your reading about that? Do you think the public opinion in the U.S. is in favor of going into the Middle East again, given that the U.S. has had major failures in this particular region, the most infamous one being Iraq?
No, I don't think the American public would support the administration engaging. And you're quite right. The American policy in the Middle East has been a failure in the so-called war on terror. After the attack on 9/11, America went charging off into Afghanistan, wound up there for 20 years and accomplished nothing, wound up in Iraq and created even more wars. American people are fed up with the Middle East. In fact, they're trying to get out of the Middle East. You know, America has been trying to pivot to the Pacific for the last, I guess, 9 years or so. It hasn't been done, but I don't think the American people would support this. And keep in mind that what goes on in Washington isn't exactly what goes on in the American heartland. Because the foreign policy establishment wants to do something doesn't mean the American people want to do the same thing. And you're quite right. Almost all foreign policy decisions are domestic policy. It's about politics at home, how it plays at home, and all the rest of it. And I think the Iranians and maybe even a number of Arab nations are looking very closely at what happens in 2024 if Donald Trump gets elected. And, you know, he's a favorite to get elected right now if he's not in jail. he would reverse policy in all these places very, very quickly, as a matter of fact. The United States does not want to get bogged down. And of course, what the United States has in the case of Israel-Gaza, it's got a policy that has failed. You know, I get tired of people telling me that America doesn't even think about what goes on there. Jimmy Carter, our 39th president, wrote a beautiful book on this called Palestine, Apartheid or Peace. He could see 20 years ago that this thing had to be solved, and it hasn't been solved. And much of the tragedy you are describing, which is almost hard to watch, is about America's bankrupt policy in the Middle East. There's just nothing else to give.
Now, Professor, we're running out of time, but I really want to ask you this one question, and I'm not sure if you have an answer to this one because it's a really difficult one to answer because no one knows what's going to happen in the Middle East in the next few days or weeks. So I'm just giving you a scenario. If Israel launches a ground invasion of Gaza, and there's a response from countries like Iran and Syria to that, do you think it is likely for the U.S. to get involved into it directly, militarily? Please keep your answer very short because we're running out of time.
The answer is yes. The United States would be in it in a New York minute. If Iran jumped into this or Syria jumped into this, those American planes on those ships would be there very quickly. There's no doubt in my mind that America is very close to getting to the end. But I have to say something else before you go off. Right now, it looks like Gaza has been destroyed. I mean, the Israeli Defense Force has done about all it can do. It's destroyed commerce, finance, education, health. I mean, the people in Gaza are never going to recover what's happened to them over the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's not possible. And those children will be traumatized from here to the end of the world. So in many ways, Gaza has been destroyed. And so we're back to the drawing board about, you know, not only what happens next with America, but what happens to the Palestinian question.
Indeed, it's truly heartbreaking to see what's happening with the children and women and civilians of Gaza. Professor Joe Siracusa, it's always a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World.